The moment I heard those words read aloud in that cold, sterile conference room, I understood what it meant to feel your entire world crack beneath your feet, like thin ice over a frozen lake. $47 million. That was what my grandfather had left behind after 8 decades of building, sweating, and creating something from absolutely nothing. And according to the document that the attorney held in his perfectly manicured hands, I was to receive exactly nothing. Not a single penny. Not a photograph. Not even the worn leather journal that my grandfather had promised me on his deathbed, just 3 weeks before he took his final breath. I remember sitting there, my hands clasped so tightly in my lap that my knuckles had gone white, staring at my older brother Daniel across that mahogany table. He wouldn't look at me. He kept his eyes fixed on the attorney, his expression arranged into something that was supposed to resemble grief, but looked more like the careful mask of a man trying very hard not to smile. And in that moment, something cold and sharp began to form in my chest. Something that would eventually consume every waking thought I had for the next 18 months of my life. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand how I got to that conference room, how my own brother became the architect of my complete erasure from our family's legacy, I need to take you back to the beginning. Back to when Daniel was still the person I trusted most in this world. The person I would have taken a bullet for without hesitation. Back to when I still believed that blood was thicker than betrayal. My grandfather, Harold Whitfield, was the kind of man they simply don't make anymore. He grew up in poverty in rural Ohio, the son of a coal miner who died of black lung when my grandfather was just 12 years old. He worked his first construction job at 14, lying about his age to get hired, and by the time he was 30, he had started his own company with nothing but a rusted pickup truck and a reputation for being the most reliable builder in 3 counties. Whitfield construction grew slowly at first, then exponentially during the housing boom of the 1980s and 90s. By the time I was born, my grandfather was one of the wealthiest men in Columbus, Ohio, though you would never know it from looking at him. He still wore the same work boots he'd had for 20 years. He still drove a Ford pickup. Nothing fancy, nothing flashy, and every Sunday without fail, he would pick me up from my parents' house and take me to his favorite diner, where we would share pancakes and talk for hours about everything and nothing. Those Sunday mornings were sacred to me. They were the foundation of who I became as a person. My brother Daniel, 5 years my senior, had a different relationship with our grandfather. Where I saw a mentor and a friend, Daniel saw an opportunity. I didn't recognize it then, of course. I was too blinded by the image of the protective older brother who taught me to ride a bike, who scared off the bullies in middle school, who gave me advice about boys when I was too embarrassed to ask our mother. But looking back now, I can see the pattern that was always there, hidden in plain sight. Daniel went to law school not because he had any passion for justice or helping people, but because he had calculated exactly what kind of career would give him access to our grandfather's considerable fortune. He specialized in estate planning, and by the time he was 30, he had positioned himself as the natural choice to handle all of our grandfather's legal affairs. Our grandfather trusted him completely. How could he not? Daniel was his grandson, his flesh and blood, the firstborn son of his only child. Our mother, Claire, had always been a quiet woman, the kind who floated through life, never quite making waves. She married our father when she was young, had Daniel and me in quick succession, and then spent the next 2 decades slowly disappearing into the background of her own existence. When our father died of a heart attack when I was 19, she retreated even further into herself. She deferred to Daniel on virtually everything, treating him less like her son and more like the head of the household that our father had left vacant. I, on the other hand, had taken a different path entirely. I became an elementary school teacher because I genuinely loved working with children, loved watching their eyes light up when they finally understood a concept that had been eluding them. I didn't make much money, barely enough to afford my small apartment on the east side of Columbus, but I was happy. I had my students, my Sunday mornings with my grandfather, and the comfortable belief that my family, while not perfect, was fundamentally good. The first crack in that belief appeared 3 years before my grandfather died, though I didn't recognize it for what it was at the time. I had stopped by my grandfather's house on a Wednesday evening, unusual for me since Sundays were typically our day. But I had found an old photograph of him and my grandmother at my parents' house, one I had never seen before, and I wanted to give it to him. His home was a modest colonial that he had built himself in 1972, the same house where he had raised my mother, the same house where my grandmother had taken her last breath in 1998. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed Daniel's BMW parked near the garage. This surprised me because Daniel rarely visited unless there was something specific to discuss, usually business-related. I let myself in through the side door, as I always did, and I heard voices coming from the study. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, I genuinely wasn't, but something about my brother's tone made me pause in the hallway, just out of sight. "You need to think about this seriously, Grandpa," Daniel was saying, his voice carrying that particular edge he used when he was trying to convince someone of something. "Emma's lifestyle, her choices, they're not exactly stable. She's a teacher. She makes what, $40,000 a year? If you leave her any significant portion of the estate, she won't know how to handle it. She could lose it all to some scam or some bad investment. Is that what you want? Your life's work squandered because you didn't plan properly?" I felt my blood turn cold. I pressed myself against the wall, barely breathing. My grandfather's voice came next, weaker than I was used to hearing it. He had been diagnosed with early-stage heart disease the previous year, and it was starting to take its toll. "I don't know, Danny. Emma has always been responsible. She doesn't live beyond her means. She saves what she can." "That's exactly my point," Daniel continued, and I could hear him pacing, something he did when he was building toward a point. "She saves what she can because she doesn't understand wealth. She doesn't understand investment strategies or tax implications. I'm not saying cut her out completely. I'm saying protect her from herself. Set up a trust, give her an allowance, something that ensures she can't make any catastrophic mistakes with money she's not equipped to manage." There was a long pause. I heard my grandfather cough, then sigh. "Maybe you're right. You're the lawyer in the family. You know about these things." I should have walked in right then. I should have confronted my brother, demanded to know what he was doing, poisoning our grandfather's mind against me. But I was so shocked, so completely blindsided by what I had heard, that I couldn't move. I stood there frozen until I heard them moving toward the door, and then I slipped back outside before they could see me. That night, I told myself it wasn't as bad as it sounded. Daniel was just looking out for me, in his own misguided way. He was an estate attorney, after all. This was his area of expertise. Maybe he genuinely believed what he was saying. Maybe I was overreacting. I wish I could go back and shake that naive version of myself. I wish I could show her the documents I would eventually uncover, the emails, the carefully orchestrated campaign of isolation that my brother had been conducting for years. But hindsight is a cruel teacher, and I had to learn my lessons the hard way. Over the next 3 years, I noticed small changes in my relationship with my grandfather. Our Sunday breakfasts became less frequent. First, they moved to every other week, then once a month, with my grandfather always offering vague excuses about not feeling well or having previous commitments. When I called, he didn't always answer. When I visited, Daniel's car was increasingly present in the driveway. I tried talking to my mother about it, but she dismissed my concerns. "Your grandfather's getting older, Emma. He doesn't have the energy he used to, and Daniel's been such a help with all the legal matters. You should be grateful your brother is taking such good care of him." Grateful. That word would come to taste like ash in my mouth. The final decline happened faster than any of us expected. In January of the year that would change everything, my grandfather suffered a major heart attack. He survived, but barely. The doctors said he would need round-the-clock care for the foreseeable future. Daniel immediately volunteered to manage this, hiring nurses and establishing a rotation of caregivers. He also made it clear in that subtle way of his, that too many visitors would be stressful for our grandfather's recovery. "I know you want to see him, Em," he said to me one evening, his hand on my shoulder in a gesture that was supposed to be comforting. "But the doctors say he needs rest. Limited stimulation. I promise I'll let you know when he's strong enough for visitors." I believed him. Why wouldn't I? He was my brother. Weeks turned into months. I called daily, but my calls were screened by the nurses, who always had the same message. "Mr. Whitfield is resting. Mr. Whitfield is in a treatment. Mr. Whitfield can't come to the phone right now." I sent cards and flowers and handwritten letters. I have no idea if any of them ever reached him. In August, I finally put my foot down. I showed up at my grandfather's house unannounced, prepared to push past whatever barriers Daniel had erected. One of the nurses answered the door, a woman I didn't recognize, and she looked nervous when she saw me. "I'm here to see my grandfather," I said firmly, "and I'm not leaving until I do." She let me in, whether because she saw the determination in my eyes or because she simply didn't have the authority to stop me. I found my grandfather in his bedroom, propped up against a mountain of pillows, looking frailer than I had ever seen him. His eyes, once so sharp and clear, were clouded with confusion. But when he saw me, something flickered in them. Recognition. Relief. "Emma," he whispered, reaching out a trembling hand. "Emma, you came." I rushed to his side, taking his hand in both of mine. "Of course I came, Grandpa. I've been trying to see you for months. I'm so sorry it took this long." Tears leaked from the corners of his eyes. "They told me you didn't want to come. They said you were too busy. Your life, your job." I understood. "But I missed you, sweetheart. I missed our Sundays." My heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. "Who told you that, Grandpa? Who told you I didn't want to come?" But before he could answer, Daniel walked into the room. His face went through a rapid series of transformations when he saw me there. Surprise, irritation, and then, smooth as silk, concern. "Emma, what are you doing here? I told you Grandpa needs his rest." I stood up slowly, still holding my grandfather's hand. "I needed to see him, Daniel. I hadn't seen him in 6 months. He's my grandfather, too." "Of course he is." Daniel's smile didn't reach his eyes. "But the doctors have been very clear about limiting his stress. Unexpected visitors can set back his recovery." "I'm not an unexpected visitor. I'm his granddaughter." My grandfather's grip tightened on my hand. "Let her stay, Danny. Please. Just for a little while." For a moment I saw something flash in my brother's eyes. Something dark and calculating. But then it was gone, replaced by his practiced mask of benevolent concern. "Of course, Grandpa. Whatever you want." We talked for nearly an hour that afternoon, my grandfather and I. His memory came and went, clouded by the medications he was taking, but there were moments of perfect clarity when he was fully himself again. During one of those moments, he looked at me with an intensity that made my breath catch. "I need you to know something, Emma," he said quietly, glancing toward the door as if to make sure Daniel wasn't listening. "I've made provisions. For you. No matter what anyone tells you, I've made provisions. The lockbox. At the bank. You remember?" I nodded. When I was 16, my grandfather had taken me to his bank and shown me a safety deposit box. He had given me a key, told me it was for emergencies, for when he was gone and I needed to know the truth about things. "I remember, Grandpa." "Good girl." He patted my hand weakly. "Good girl. Don't let anyone tell you different. You understand?" I didn't understand, not fully. But I told him I did, because I could see how important it was to him. 2 weeks later, he was gone. The funeral was a massive affair, befitting a man of my grandfather's standing in the community. Hundreds of people came to pay their respects: business associates, city officials, employees who had worked for Whitfield Construction for decades. I sat in the front row between my mother and my brother, numb with grief, barely hearing the eulogies and the prayers. Daniel spoke last. He stood at the podium in his impeccable black suit, his voice steady and his words eloquent, painting a picture of a devoted grandson who had cherished every moment with his grandfather. Watching him, listening to him speak about love and loss and legacy, I almost believed it. I almost forgot the conversation I had overheard 3 years earlier, the months of isolation, the lies that had been told to my grandfather about me not wanting to visit. Almost. The reading of the will took place 2 weeks later, in the conference room of Daniel's law firm. He had recused himself from the official proceedings, of course, because of the obvious conflict of interest, but he was present as a beneficiary. A partner at the firm, a man named Robert Chandler, handled the reading. I remember every detail of that room. The mahogany table that seemed to stretch on forever. The floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the Columbus skyline. The subtle scent of leather and old money that permeated everything. My mother sat on one side of me, Daniel on the other. There were a few other people present, representatives from charities my grandfather had supported, a few long-time employees who were receiving bequests. Robert Chandler cleared his throat and began to read. The first several pages were standard legal language, the kind of boilerplate that appears in every will. Then came the specific bequests, charitable donations, gifts to loyal employees, a scholarship fund for students studying construction management, and then the family provisions. To my daughter, Claire Elizabeth Whitfield, I leave the sum of $5 million to be held in a trust managed by... I heard my mother gasp softly beside me. $5 million was certainly generous, though it represented only a fraction of my grandfather's total estate. To my grandson, Daniel Robert Whitfield, I leave the remainder of my estate, including all real property, business interests in Whitfield Construction and its subsidiaries, investment portfolios, and personal effects not otherwise designated. My blood ran cold. To my granddaughter, Emma Louise Whitfield, I held my breath. I leave my sincere hope that she finds peace and fulfillment in her life's chosen path. That was it. That was everything. While my brother received an empire worth tens of millions of dollars, I received a platitude, a sentence. Less than nothing. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I looked at Daniel, desperate for some explanation, some indication that this was a mistake, that there had been some mix-up. But he still wouldn't meet my eyes. He was staring at the table, his jaw tight, his hands clasped in front of him. This can't be right, I heard myself say. My voice sounded distant, like it was coming from someone else. This can't be what he wanted. Robert Chandler looked uncomfortable. I understand this is difficult, Miss Whitfield, but I assure you, the will was properly executed and witnessed. If you have concerns, you're certainly entitled to seek independent legal counsel. I don't need independent legal counsel, I said, my voice rising. I need someone to explain to me how my grandfather, who loved me, who promised me I would always be taken care of, could leave me absolutely nothing. Emma. Daniel's voice was soft, gentle, the voice of a concerned older brother. Maybe we should discuss this privately. This isn't the time or place. I turned to look at him, really look at him, and for the first time in my life, I saw him clearly. I saw the calculation behind his eyes, the satisfaction he was barely managing to conceal. And I realized, with a certainty that settled into my bones like winter frost, that my brother had done this. Somehow, in some way, he had orchestrated my complete erasure from our grandfather's legacy. You did this, I whispered. Didn't you? Daniel's expression shifted into something wounded, hurt. Emma, I know you're upset, but I need you to understand that I had nothing to do with Grandpa's decisions. He was a grown man. He had his own reasons for doing what he did. His own reasons? I laughed, and even to my own ears it sounded unhinged. His own reasons for leaving everything to you and nothing to me? After 40 years of loving me? After promising me on his deathbed that he had made provisions for me? Something flickered in Daniel's eyes at that. A moment of surprise, of concern. "What do you mean, provisions?" he asked carefully. But I was already standing, already gathering my purse, already walking toward the door. I couldn't stay in that room another moment. I couldn't breathe the same air as my brother, couldn't bear the weight of my mother's sympathetic silence. "Emma, wait." Daniel was following me. "We need to talk about this. You're clearly not thinking rationally. Let me explain. Let me help you understand." I stopped at the door and turned to face him. "No," I said quietly. "You don't get to help me with anything. Not anymore." And then I walked out, my grandfather's words echoing in my mind. "The lockbox. At the bank. You remember?" I remembered. I drove straight to First National Bank, the same branch where my grandfather had taken me all those years ago. The key to the safety deposit box had been on my keychain for 16 years. So familiar that I barely noticed it anymore. But now I clutched it in my hand like a lifeline. The bank manager recognized my name, expressed his condolences about my grandfather. He led me to the vault, verified my identification, and then left me alone with the box. My hands were shaking as I lifted the lid. Inside, I found a thick manila envelope. Written on the front, in my grandfather's distinctive handwriting, were the words, "For Emma, when I'm gone." I opened it carefully, reverently. Inside were several documents. The first was a letter, handwritten, dated just 2 months before my grandfather's heart attack. "My dearest Emma, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and something has gone very wrong. I've always believed the best in people, especially in family, but over the past few years, I've begun to have doubts about certain things, about certain people. I've instructed my attorney to prepare a new will, one that reflects my true wishes for my estate. You were always meant to receive half of everything, Emma. You were meant to be taken care of. If the will that is read after my death does not reflect this, then someone has interfered. Someone I trusted. I'm writing this now because I'm afraid. I'm afraid of what your brother has become. I've seen things, Emma. Documents I wasn't meant to see. Conversations I wasn't meant to hear. I believe Daniel has been manipulating me, isolating me from you, trying to ensure that he controls everything after I'm gone. I don't have proof. I wish I did. But I know my own mind, and I know what I intended. Enclosed you will find a copy of my true will, the one I signed in September of last year, before Daniel convinced me to make changes. You will also find records of the conversations I had with my original attorney, Arthur Hendricks, who retired 6 months ago, under circumstances I now find suspicious. I love you, sweetheart. I have always loved you. Whatever happens, whatever you find, please know that. Fight for the truth. Your grandpa." I read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face. Then I looked at the other documents in the envelope. The first was indeed a will, dated September of the previous year. It was almost identical to the will that had been read today, with one crucial difference. It split the estate evenly between Daniel and me. The second was a series of handwritten notes documenting conversations with Arthur Hendricks, my grandfather's longtime attorney. According to these notes, my grandfather had expressed concerns about Daniel's influence over business decisions. Hendricks had recommended an independent review of several transactions. And then, abruptly, Hendricks had announced his retirement and moved to Florida. The third was a stack of emails printed out that had been forwarded to my grandfather by someone at Whitfield Construction. These emails, sent between Daniel and the company's CFO, discussed something called the transition plan and made references to ensuring the old man doesn't interfere with necessary changes. I sat in that cold bank vault for nearly an hour, reading and rereading the documents my grandfather had left for me. By the time I emerged, the grief I had carried into that building had transformed into something else entirely. Something harder, sharper. I was going to find out exactly what my brother had done. and then I was going to make him pay for every single bit of it. The next few weeks were a blur of legal consultations and research. I found an attorney named Marcus Webb, a specialist in contested wills and estate litigation, who agreed to review my grandfather's documents. His initial assessment was cautious but encouraging. "You definitely have grounds to contest," he told me in his cramped office, surrounded by towers of case files. The existence of an earlier will with different provisions, combined with evidence of potential undue influence, creates a viable path forward. But I have to be honest with you, Emma. Your brother is an attorney himself, and a well-connected one. He's going to fight this with everything he has. Good, I said. Let him fight. Marcus raised an eyebrow. You understand this could take years, and it could get ugly. Very ugly. Contesting a will among family members often brings out the worst in people. My brother left me nothing, I replied quietly. He isolated our grandfather in his final months. He poisoned him against me. Whatever ugliness is coming, I think it's already been here for a long time. We filed the contest 2 weeks later. The grounds cited were undue influence, lack of testamentary capacity at the time the final will was signed, and the existence of a prior valid will that better reflected the decedent's intentions. Daniel's response was swift and devastating. He filed a counter motion claiming that I was attempting to defraud the estate, that the will I had produced was a forgery, and that I should be barred from any proceedings related to my grandfather's estate. He also filed a motion to have the safety deposit box and its contents impounded as potential evidence in a criminal investigation. But that wasn't the worst of it. 3 days after the counter motion was filed, I received a phone call from my mother. Her voice was cold, distant, nothing like the warm tones I had known my entire life. Your brother has shown me the evidence, she said without preamble. I know what you're trying to do, Emma. I know you're trying to steal from this family. My heart dropped. Mom, that's not true. Daniel is the one who manipulated Grandpa's will. I have proof. I have documents. Daniel told me you would say that. He told me you would have fake documents prepared. He warned me about this months ago, said you might try something like this if things didn't go your way. I felt sick. Of course Daniel had gotten to her first. Of course he had spent months laying the groundwork, preparing her to reject anything I might say. Mom, please, you have to listen to me. Come see the documents yourself. Have an independent expert examine them. I'm not asking you to take my word for it. I'm asking you to look at the evidence. There was a long pause. When my mother spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. I can't do that, Emma. Daniel says if I meet with you, it could compromise his case. He says I could be considered a co-conspirator if I appear to be helping you. Co-conspirator? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Mom, you're not a co-conspirator. You're my mother. Your father just died, and your son is lying to you about your daughter. Doesn't that matter to you at all? Another pause. Then, I think it's best if we don't speak for a while, just until this is all sorted out. The line went dead. I sat there holding the phone for a long time, trying to process what had just happened. In the span of a few weeks, I had lost my grandfather, been disinherited, and now been essentially disowned by my mother, all because of Daniel, all because of his greed and his manipulation, and his absolute determination to control everything our grandfather had built. The legal battle that followed was exactly as ugly as Marcus had warned me it would be. Daniel hired a team of attorneys from one of the largest firms in Ohio, and they came after me with a ferocity that bordered on personal vendetta. They filed motion after motion, challenged every piece of evidence I presented, and hired experts to testify that the will I had found in the safety deposit box was almost certainly forged. For 6 months, I felt like I was drowning. The legal fees were astronomical. I had to take out a second mortgage on my apartment. I was barely sleeping, barely eating, barely functioning at work. There were days when I genuinely considered giving up, accepting that Daniel had won, trying to piece together what was left of my life. And then I received an unexpected phone call. "Is this Emma Whitfield?" The voice on the other end was female, hesitant, uncertain. "Yes, who is this?" "My name is Christine Hendricks. I'm Arthur Hendricks's daughter. I think we need to talk." Arthur Hendricks, my grandfather's original attorney, the one who had abruptly retired and moved to Florida right when Daniel was consolidating his control over my grandfather's legal affairs. I met Christine at a coffee shop in Bexley, a suburb east of Columbus. She was a woman in her mid-50s, with graying hair and tired eyes that suggested she hadn't been sleeping well lately either. "I'm sorry I didn't reach out sooner," she said, stirring her coffee nervously. "When my father moved to Florida, he made me promise not to get involved in any of this. He said it was too dangerous, that there were powerful people who wouldn't hesitate to ruin anyone who got in their way." My heart was pounding. "What people? What did your father know?" Christine looked around the coffee shop as if checking to make sure we weren't being watched. "My father didn't want to retire," she said quietly. "He loved his work. He especially loved working with your grandfather. They had been friends for 40 years. "Then why did he leave?" She reached into her purse and pulled out a thick envelope, similar to the one I had found in the safety deposit box. "Because someone made him an offer he couldn't refuse. A very large payment to his retirement account, in exchange for stepping aside and keeping his mouth shut about certain irregularities he had noticed in your grandfather's estate planning." I stared at the envelope. "Who made this offer?" "Your brother." Christine slid the envelope across the table. "My father felt terrible about it. The guilt ate at him every day. When he heard about your lawsuit, he wanted to come forward. But he was afraid of what Daniel might do." She paused, swallowed hard. "My father died 3 weeks ago, heart failure. Before he passed, he asked me to give you this. He said it was time for the truth to come out." Inside the envelope, I found a detailed account of everything Arthur Hendricks had witnessed in the final years of my grandfather's life. Documents showing how Daniel had gradually taken control of all legal matters. Records of conversations in which Daniel had pressured my grandfather to change his will. Bank statements showing the payment that had been made to Arthur's retirement account, routed through a shell company that my research would later reveal was controlled by Daniel. And there was something else, something that made my blood run cold. Arthur had documented a conversation he had overheard between Daniel and a nurse just weeks before my grandfather's death. In that conversation, Daniel had instructed the nurse to increase my grandfather's medication to levels that would keep him sedated and confused. "Just until I get the new documents signed," Daniel had said. "After that, it doesn't matter anymore." I looked up at Christine, my hands trembling. "Do you understand what this means? This isn't just about the will. This is about what my brother did to my grandfather in his final days." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "I know. That's why my father couldn't die without passing this on. He felt responsible. He felt like he should have done more." I thanked her, promised to keep her informed, and drove straight to Marcus Webb's office. When I showed him what I had, his face went pale. "This changes everything," he said slowly. "This isn't just undue influence anymore. This is potential criminal activity, elder abuse, fraud, maybe even worse." "What do we do?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, thinking. "We need to be very careful how we proceed. Your brother has connections. If we go to the authorities too soon, before we have everything absolutely ironclad, he could use his influence to bury this. We need more evidence. We need to be strategic." Over the next several months, I became a detective in my own life. I tracked down every nurse who had worked in my grandfather's house during his final year. Most of them refused to talk to me, clearly frightened. But one, a woman named Rosa Martinez, agreed to meet with me after I explained what I had already discovered. Rosa had been fired by Daniel 3 days after my grandfather's death, ostensibly for poor performance. But the real reason, she told me, was that she had refused to follow Daniel's instructions to increase my grandfather's medication. He wanted your grandfather confused, she said, her voice heavy with old guilt. He wanted him unable to think clearly. I saw the way your grandfather would look sometimes, in his lucid moments. He knew something was wrong, he knew he was being controlled, but the drugs made it so hard for him to fight back. She gave me copies of medical records she had secretly kept, records that showed the medication levels Daniel had authorized, records that contradicted what was in my grandfather's official medical file. I always knew someone would come looking for the truth eventually, Rosa said. I just prayed it would be someone brave enough to use it. Armed with this new evidence, Marcus and I assembled a case that went far beyond a simple will contest. We documented a pattern of elder abuse that had lasted over 2 years. We traced the financial transactions that had been used to pay off Arthur Hendricks and others who might have interfered with Daniel's plans. We found emails, bank records, and witness statements that painted a devastating picture of systematic manipulation and fraud. And then, just when we were ready to go to the authorities, I received a visit from someone I hadn't expected. My mother. She showed up at my apartment unannounced on a Tuesday evening, looking like she had aged 10 years since I had last seen her. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her hands were shaking, and when she spoke, her voice cracked with emotion. I know the truth, she said. I know what Daniel did. I stared at her, not sure whether to feel relief or anger. How? How do you know? She sank onto my couch, as if her legs couldn't hold her anymore. He made a mistake. He got careless. He left his laptop open when he thought I was asleep, and I saw. I saw the emails, the bank transfers, the instructions to the nurses. She covered her face with her hands. My own son, my own boy. How could he do this to his grandfather? How could he do this to you? I sat down beside her, not touching her, not offering comfort. I wasn't ready for that, not yet. Mom, I need to know. Did you know anything before today? Did you have any idea? She shook her head violently. No, I swear to you, Emma, I believed him. When he told me you were forging documents, when he told me you were trying to steal from the family, I believed him because I couldn't imagine my son being capable of something like this. What kind of mother does that make me? I didn't answer. There was no good answer. I want to help, she said, looking up at me with desperate eyes. I want to make this right. Whatever you need, whatever it takes. I can testify. I can give you the emails I copied from his computer. I can tell them everything I know. For a long moment, I just looked at her. This woman who had chosen to believe my brother over me, who had cut me off, refused to see me, treated me like a criminal. Part of me wanted to turn her away, to tell her it was too little too late. But another part of me remembered what my grandfather had written in his letter. Fight for the truth. And I realized that if I turned away anyone who was willing to help, I would be betraying his memory just as surely as Daniel had. Okay, I said finally. Tell me everything. The evidence my mother provided was the final piece of the puzzle. She had not only copied the incriminating emails, but she had also found documents hidden in Daniel's home office, documents that showed he had been planning this for years. There were drafts of fake wills going back 5 years. There were notes outlining his strategy for isolating our grandfather from me. There were even communications with a private investigator he had hired to dig up dirt on me, presumably in case he needed to discredit me later. When Marcus saw what we had, he nearly wept. This is enough, he said. This is more than enough. We can go to the prosecutor's office now. But I had a different plan. I wanted Daniel to know that his downfall was coming. I wanted him to feel the same fear and helplessness that our grandfather must have felt in his final months. And I wanted him to know that it was me who had brought it upon him. I arranged to meet him at our grandfather's house, the house that Daniel now owned as part of the estate. I told him I wanted to discuss a settlement, that I was ready to drop the lawsuit in exchange for a modest payment. He agreed immediately, probably thinking he had finally broken me. When I arrived, he was waiting in the study, the same room where I had overheard him poisoning our grandfather's mind against me all those years ago. He looked relaxed, confident, every inch the successful attorney who had outmaneuvered his naive little sister. Emma. He rose to greet me, his smile warm and welcoming. I'm so glad you came to your senses. This lawsuit has been tearing our family apart. Whatever differences we have, we're still blood. Yes, I said, sitting down across from him. We are. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder. Before we discuss any settlement, I'd like to show you something. I slid the folder across the table. Inside were copies of everything. Arthur Hendricks's statement, Rosa Martinez's medical records, the emails my mother had provided, the bank records, the draft wills, everything. Daniel's face went gray as he flipped through the pages. His hands, so steady when he greeted me, began to tremble. Where did you get these? He whispered. It doesn't matter. What matters is that copies of these documents are currently in the hands of the Ohio Attorney General's office, the State Medical Board, the State Bar Association, and 3 local news stations. I leaned back in my chair, watching him. The press conference is scheduled for tomorrow morning. I wanted to give you a chance to prepare. He looked up at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw genuine fear in my brother's eyes. Emma, you can't do this. You'll destroy me. You'll destroy my career, my reputation, everything I've worked for. You mean everything you stole, I corrected him quietly. Everything you took from Grandpa, everything you took from me. Did you think I would just accept it? Did you think I would just walk away? I'm your brother. The words hung in the air between us, and suddenly I laughed. It wasn't a pleasant sound. My brother, I repeated. You kept our grandfather drugged and confused in his final months. You forged his will. You turned our mother against me. You tried to paint me as a criminal when I sought the truth. You did everything in your power to destroy my life, and now you want to claim the protection of family? Daniel was pale now, sweating. I can make this go away. I have connections. I have people who owe me favors. Whatever you think you have, it won't hold up. I stood up. Maybe you're right. Maybe some of your connections will protect you, but I don't think you'll be able to make the news coverage go away. I don't think you'll be able to stop the Bar Association from investigating. And I know you won't be able to change the fact that everyone who matters in this city is about to learn exactly what kind of man you really are. I walked to the door, then stopped and looked back at him. Grandpa left me a letter, you know. He knew what you were doing. He wrote it all down, predicted exactly what would happen, and his last words to me, his last instruction, was to fight for the truth. I smiled, and there was nothing pleasant in it. I think I've done that, don't you? And then I left him there, alone in our grandfather's house, surrounded by the evidence of his own destruction. The days that followed were chaos. The news story broke exactly as planned, picked up by every major outlet in Ohio and several national networks. The images of my brother, once a respected attorney and community figure, being escorted from his office by investigators, became inescapable. The county prosecutor announced charges of elder abuse, fraud, forgery, and criminal conspiracy. The State Bar Association suspended Daniel's license, pending a full investigation. But the most devastating blow came from an unexpected source. The employees of Whitfield Construction, the people who had worked for my grandfather for decades and who had watched Daniel's takeover with growing unease, came forward with their own evidence. Financial records showing embezzlement that went back years. Documents proving that Daniel had been siphoning company funds into his personal accounts. Testimonies about threats and intimidation used to keep employees silent. By the time the investigation was complete, Daniel wasn't just facing charges related to our grandfather's estate. He was facing a federal investigation into financial crimes that could put him away for decades. The settlement of the will contest was almost anticlimactic after everything that had happened. The court found overwhelming evidence of undue influence and fraud, vacated the will that Daniel had manufactured, and reinstated the earlier will that my grandfather had intended. My mother and I split the estate equally, as our grandfather had always wanted. Daniel's share, which he would have controlled had his scheme succeeded, was forfeited under the legal doctrine that prevents wrongdoers from benefiting from their crimes. The trial took 18 months. I attended every day, watching as witness after witness testified to my brother's systematic campaign of manipulation and fraud. I watched him grow thinner, grayer, his once confident demeanor eroding under the weight of evidence against him. I watched as former colleagues and friends, people who had once praised him, now testified against him to save themselves. On the day of the verdict, I sat in the courtroom with my mother beside me. She reached over and took my hand, something she hadn't done since I was a child. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry I didn't believe you. I'm so sorry I let him come between us." I squeezed her hand but didn't answer. There would be time for forgiveness later. Right now, I needed to see this through. The jury found Daniel guilty on all counts. The judge, an elderly woman who had known my grandfather personally, delivered the sentence with barely concealed contempt. "Mr. Whitfield, you are an officer of the court. You took an oath to uphold justice and protect the vulnerable. Instead, you used your position and your knowledge to prey upon your own grandfather in his final, most vulnerable days. You stole not only his money, but his peace of mind, his autonomy, and his ability to express his true wishes. There is perhaps no greater betrayal than that of family, and no greater abuse of trust than that perpetrated by those sworn to protect it." She sentenced him to 23 years in federal prison. He would be 70 years old before he was eligible for parole. As they led him away, Daniel looked back at me one last time. I don't know what he was looking for. Sympathy? Regret? Some sign that I would one day forgive him? He didn't find it. I held his gaze until he turned away, and then I walked out of the courtroom into the afternoon sunlight, finally free. In the months that followed, I used my share of my grandfather's estate to establish the Harold Whitfield Foundation, dedicated to protecting elderly people from financial exploitation and abuse. The foundation runs educational programs, provides legal assistance to victims, and advocates for stronger laws to protect the vulnerable. It is, I believe, exactly what my grandfather would have wanted. My mother and I have begun the long process of rebuilding our relationship. It's not easy. The trust that was broken between us can't be restored overnight. But we're trying. We have dinner together every Sunday in memory of my grandfather, and sometimes we don't talk about the past at all. Sometimes we just sit together, two women who have lost too much, trying to find their way back to each other. As for Daniel, I don't visit him, I don't write to him, I don't think about him if I can help it. He made his choices, and he is living with the consequences. Perhaps one day I will find it in myself to forgive him, not for his sake, but for my own. But that day has not yet come. What I do think about every single day is my grandfather. I think about those Sunday mornings at the diner, the pancakes, the stories he would tell about building his company from nothing. I think about his rough hands and his kind eyes, and the way he always made me feel like I was the most important person in the world. And I think about his last words to me, his instruction that I should fight for the truth. I did, Grandpa. I fought, and the truth won. There's something people don't tell you about revenge. They don't tell you that it doesn't fill the hole that betrayal leaves behind. They don't tell you that seeing your enemy brought low doesn't bring back what you lost. My grandfather is still gone. Those final months, when he was alone and confused and wondering why I never came to see him, those can never be undone. But there is something that revenge does give you, if you pursue it with patience and intelligence, and an unwillingness to compromise on justice. It gives you your power back. It gives you the knowledge that you did not simply accept what was done to you, that you stood up and said no, that you refused to be erased. My brother thought he could take everything from me. He thought he could rewrite our family's history to make himself the hero and me the villain. He thought that his intelligence, his connections, his willingness to do whatever it took would be enough to guarantee his victory. He was wrong. And now, every morning when I wake up, I look at the photograph of my grandfather that sits on my nightstand. I tell him about my day, about the foundation, about the families we've helped. I tell him that his legacy is safe, that his name is still respected, that the company he built is still standing. And sometimes, in the quiet moments just before dawn, I swear I can hear him answer, "Well done, sweetheart. I always knew you would fight for the truth." I smile. I get up. And I face another day, carrying his memory with me like a shield. Because that is what you do when someone you love is taken from you too soon. You carry them forward. You become the living embodiment of everything they believed in. And you make absolutely certain that the people who wronged them face every consequence they have earned. My name is Emma Whitfield. My brother betrayed my grandfather, stole my inheritance, and tried to destroy my life. And in the end, justice prevailed. Not because the universe is fair, not because good always triumphs over evil, but because I refused to give up, because I documented everything, because I found the people who knew the truth and convinced them to help me reveal it, and because my grandfather, even in death, found a way to leave me the tools I needed to fight back. The lockbox at the bank, the letter warning me what Daniel had become, the will that showed what my grandfather's true intentions had been. He knew. Somewhere deep in his heart, even as the drugs clouded his mind and Daniel tightened his control, my grandfather knew that something was wrong, and he did the only thing he could do. He left me a trail. He trusted me to follow it. I followed it, Grandpa, all the way to the end, and I won. That is the story of how I challenged my grandfather's will and became his enemy's enemy. The story of how trust was betrayed, how justice was stolen, and how, with patience and determination and an absolute refusal to accept defeat, I took it all back. If you're reading this, if you're facing your own betrayal, your own impossible fight against someone who should have loved you but chose instead to use you, I want you to know something. It can be done. It won't be easy. It will take everything you have. It will cost you sleep and peace of mind, and probably some relationships you thought were unbreakable. There will be days when you want to give up, when the enemy seems too powerful, when the truth seems too well hidden to ever see the light. But the truth has a way of coming out. Betrayers make mistakes. They get careless. They trust the wrong people. And if you are patient, if you are strategic, if you never stop looking for the cracks in their armor, you will find the opening you need. My grandfather taught me many things in the years we shared together. He taught me the value of hard work. He taught me the importance of treating people with respect. He taught me that the measure of a person is not what they achieve when times are easy, but how they behave when times are hard. And in his final letter, written in those last months when he was fighting a battle he couldn't win, he taught me the most important lesson of all. Fight for the truth. I did, and I always will, for him, for myself, and for everyone who has ever been wronged by someone they trusted completely. This is my stow.